Hi, I'm Brad DeRoche. Welcome to my series on sight reading. This is lesson 19. In today's lesson, we're going to read notes in the very high register. So that's way up here above the soundboard. This is a very tricky register to read in. We talked about this in a previous lesson, but it's also physically difficult to play up here because of the change in hand position. So when you do play, you probably have to push your elbow forward a little bit in this direction to move the hand up around the top of the fingerboard when we play. Helps us a little bit. And then also bring your thumb up to the side here instead of trying to keep it behind the neck and playing sideways like that. All right, those things will help you a little bit technically. Then today, what I want to focus on, besides just playing the notes in the very high register, was to try to really establish a good protocol for sight reading. And so right now we've kind of got 5 steps in this procedure. The first step, I'll just go through them here with you again. The first step is to scan through the piece of music. So when you scan through it, what are you looking for? You're looking for things like the key signature. You're looking for repeats and big sections that have to be played more than once. Da capos, returning to the beginning and so forth, so that you understand the form of the piece, how it's going to unfold in time, and where you have to look. So that's one of the most important things I look for first. So after a meter signature, I look for form. I also look for key signature. Are there sharps and flats? So far we haven't had any sharps or flats in our key signatures, so I haven't really mentioned that. But I'm just looking for these kind of big picture ideas first. Then I'm going to start to look at individual rhythms. Are there tricky spots in the piece? So is there anything that looks difficult? Usually it's tricky rhythms or maybe clusters of notes in a chord that trip us up the most. One of the other things that's really difficult for people are leaps. So big leaps, distances between notes from low to high. And so if you see those, that usually makes people slow down, and oftentimes they get notes wrong in those spots because they fall out of rhythm and then they struggle to get caught back up and so on. The other thing that's very helpful to know is that when you get to the end of a line, making sure that your eyes really are thinking ahead and you're looking ahead to the next part to get back on track without stalling at the end of a line. So the scanning ahead part just kind of gives me a lay of the land, and it's really, really important that you do that before you play. If you do this regularly, you get accustomed to it, it really does make life a lot easier once you start playing the piece of music, instead of just digging in and playing the first notes and carrying on from there. All right, second step is to use a metronome. Metronomes are really, really helpful tools. For me, they help push me forward, and so that I don't stop and replay a note or a section if I make a mistake. Now, if I don't use a metronome, it's really easy if I make a mistake to stop and repeat it and play it a couple of times and just sort of tell myself, well, I needed to fix that spot. But that's not going to make you a good sight reader. That's going to make you a very poor sight reader if you're always stopping to correct things, all right? That is not the point of sight reading at all. That is a different form of practice where you're trying to polish things and learn them, memorize them. And that's not what this course is for. All right. So anyway, our second step was to use a metronome, and do use it. It does help. As far as the metronome speeds go for these pieces, I just choose one kind of at random, and then we just go with that. But you have to adjust to make it work for you. The third step in this sight reading protocol is to make sure you do not stop. So once you start playing, you go all the way through to the end. You take your lumps as you're going along. So if you miss a note or a rhythm, just let it go and get back on track as soon as possible. All right? People will forgive you if you miss a note. That's not the end of the world. But if you get completely mixed up and you stop playing, that's kind of a bigger problem. All right? So don't worry about a single note. You just keep moving and move forward at all costs. So the third step was don't stop once you start playing. Fourth was something I introduced in the last section or last lesson, and that was look at chunks of information. Try to grasp bigger bits of information each time you look at the page, instead of thinking of single notes and one note at a time. And this is one of the things that you'll find you will need to move from a beginner level sight reader to an intermediate level sight reader, is that you have to be able to grab chunks of information. And the more you think about it and practice it, the faster it will come. Okay? So fourth step, grab chunks of information and look ahead. All right, so you're always planning your next step. And then lastly, this fifth step is to get a 90% score or higher. And if you find you're regularly getting 90% score or higher on these exercises, fantastic, you're doing great. You've got a good metronome speed, it's working well for you. If you're getting way below 90%, you're just going too fast. All right, make it a little easier on yourself and slow the metronome pace down. Okay? All right, so we've got our 5-step protocol for sight reading each piece of music. So let's do that together. Let's look at Clementine, that's on page 7 here in this collection. And what I noticed right away is in 3/4 time. All right, there's no sharps or flats in the key signature. There's an incomplete measure at the very beginning. It starts on beat 3, so 3 and to start with. And it's got lots of quarter notes and eighth notes in this piece. And that's mostly what there are. There's a couple of half notes too. I also noticed there's no repeat sign, so we're just going to play this piece one time through. As far as grabbing chunks of information, I know right at the very beginning I can grab a chunk, 3 C's in a row, C, 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 and then a G. And so that's that piece of information, that chunk of information I'm going to try and think of as a group and try to play all of those notes, or think of all those notes before I even start playing. So then once I do start playing, I can start looking at the next chunk and trying to fathom what that is before I play it. All right, so let's try this together. I slowed the metronome a little bit for this one because it's harder to play in this very high register, and we are also dealing with some new rhythms with eighth notes. All right, so let's try it together. How about a pace of 80? You try that, see if that works for you. It may or may not. Adjust as you need to. So find your first note here. Our first note is a C. Wow, way up here. On the 5th string at the 15th fret. All right, here we go. 1 and 2 and. All right, so all I did was one time through, very high register. I did my protocol first, my 5 steps, made sure I looked ahead and all that. I set the metronome, and in this case, I got a 100% score. So for me, I would probably need to raise the metronome up a little bit so I can actually start to struggle a little bit. Now, it sounds silly to think that we want anything less than 100%, but if you're not pushing yourself and you're not struggling a little bit, you're probably not learning all either. So make sure you're struggling just a little bit to keep up. Okay, not so much that you're missing every other note, of course, but 90% score. That's what we're looking for. All right, so then after I've played it in a very high register, I go through all 4 of these tunes, then I would move down to the high register. So I'm going to do the same piece here. I'll keep the metronome the same. So that would start here. And so on. All right, you get the idea. And then I would move that down after I've gone through all 4 of those pieces. I would move down to middle register next. And then finally down to low register. Okay? And so that's the procedure for today, is to play these pieces in all 4 registers. Wow, that's actually pretty tricky to do. So this method that I devised, I actually did this for myself. It wasn't something somebody really taught me how to do or told me to do. I just did this. I remember one summer working on a collection of melodies from actually an old Wurlitzer, I think it was Wurlitzer or Hammond organ method, forget the company, but there were a bunch of really great classical music pieces. Must have been, I don't know, more than 100 of them, easily more than 100 of them. And my father had found this old collection of sheet music, and so he gave it to me, and it was probably printed about in the 1950s or so. And they were single note melodies, kind of large size font. And I thought, wow, what a great little collection of pieces to try to read on the guitar. And so what I started doing was reading in these different registers here. And in doing that, I felt like it really opened up my knowledge of the fingerboard. And I was already playing advanced level music. But what I found was that I really needed to fill in some gaps. And so that method of playing single note melodies in all these different registers was what did it for me. It really it really solidified my knowledge of the fingerboard and helped me to find the notes much more quickly than I had before. And no blame for any other teacher or any other mentor in the past for not giving me this information. There's just so many things to learn how to do. But what I wish there was a method of some kind, like what I'm doing here, out there for me to go through, where I could have learned notes in all these registers. Now there may be, but I never found one for myself, so I kind of created my own, and that's what we're doing here. So after this, you can use this method that I've given you in this third section here of working on melodies, and it will enhance your ability greatly, I'm sure. But there's more to come yet, so I hope that you'll continue sticking with me and as we go through some of these new things in the next few lessons. All right, until then, carry on, do good work, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.